Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining the February webinar of Generation Restoration Dialogue presented by UNCCT and G20 Global Land Initiative. My name is Zaya, and I'll be hosting this webinar with my co-host Jamian. And this webinar will be in two parts. First part will be our speaker's presentation, and the second part will be the Q&A session. Just a reminder for the people who registered, certificates of participation will be sent to your emails after the webinar ends. So let's begin our webinar. This February webinar is all about wetlands, land, and climate nexus, and our theme is exploring Earth's wetlands and how they save our climate. This session is aligned with World Wetlands Day, which was on the 2nd of February, and will focus on the critical role of wetlands in land restoration and climate resilience, with an emphasis on Indigenous and traditional knowledge as essential foundations for sustainable wetland management. Also, we invite you all participants to submit your reflections, what you have learned at the session, either in the chat below or in the Q&A box or by email, which I'll write it down in the chat. Let's present our speakers. Our first speaker is Siska Devereux, who is an environmental engineer, and she's the European representative for Youth Engaged in Wetlands, recently supported the Youth Engaged Wetlands team at the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands COP15 in Zimbabwe. Siska, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Saya. Hello, everybody. Very nice to see you all today. My name is Siska Devereux. As Saya kindly introduced me, I am speaking today on behalf of Youth Engaged in Wetlands. I'm also checking in today from Nairobi in Kenya from the UN Environment Programme, where I support the Global Peatlands Initiative. But I'm originally from Dublin, Ireland, and a country with very many wetlands. So this is a very nice topic to speak on today. Today, I'll be sharing about how we bridge knowledge in youth engaged in wetlands through intergenerational dialogues. I'll be documenting particularly our participation at the COP15 at the Convention on Wetlands in Zimbabwe this last year. So the first question we ask is, why do we need intergenerational dialogues? I have a very nice quote here, which I encourage you to read. But for me, the reason is because, number one, equity matters. Decisions that are being taken today in boardrooms, in high-level discussions in global policy are affecting youth disproportionately. Youth are active. We are here. We are across all of these rooms. We are working on the ground, and we're ready to be part of it. And also because we are stronger together. And as part of this quote, I think the part that stood out for me the most is when wisdom meets innovation. And this is something we really try to embrace in Youth Engaged in Wetlands. So just for those who don't know, the Convention on Wetlands, also known as the Ramsar Convention, is an intergovernmental treaty that focuses on the conservation and wise use of wetlands. It's one of the oldest multi-environmental agreements, multilateral environmental agreements adopted in 1971 in Iran. And it's a global framework for wetlands, which has 173 contracting parties who meet every triennium. The last one being in July in 2025 in Zimbabwe. And you can see in our picture here's our team, but we have been engaged with the convention since 2018, with a particular milestone also in 2022, when the first youth resolution was formally recognized and adopted, which led to the setup of a youth working group and also youth national focal points. Which is where we come in. You can see our very happy faces in this picture. Is a global team. We work mostly online. We're more of a platform organization that really wants to enable and empower meaningful youth inclusion in the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. We've been doing this since 2018, after we were established after COP13. And one of our first steps was really looking at what is the status of youth working on wetlands. And we found that youth are very much engaged, particularly on the ground. Since then, we were involved with the adoption in 2022 of the first youth resolution. As part of this, we took a leading role in the Ramsar Youth Working Group and the creation of the Youth Work Plan, which also included the designation of national youth focal points. And then this year, we also had well, in 2025 was a big year. Also, we were involved with the drafting and sponsoring of the second youth resolution. So yeah, we're very happy we can say we were there showing up for youth at COP15. We also did a lot of work on pre-COP training programs to make sure that also everybody was prepared for what was to come when we were at the convention. In the end, we had over 30 youth delegates there, 10 of which were from Youth Engaged in Wetlands. These were across many different organizations, many of which were also youth who were involved in the on national delegations who were designated national youth focal points. We had 4 dedicated youth-led side events with high-level support. You can see in the picture there, we had Mazunda Mumba, who was the Secretary General of the Convention on Wetlands, as well as the Deputy Executive Director of UNEP, showing that organizations, even on a very high level, are willing to show up for youth. As well as by the host Zimbabwe. They had an incredible welcome dinner hosted by the Zimbabwean government, which also made youth feel very much included during the convention. Our main result from our participation was that the youth resolution was adopted. And what this means is that over the next 3 years until COP16, the Youth Working Group will be reinstated. So it's made up of observers such as ourselves from the Youth Engaged in Wetlands, as well as national focal points who represent their country. Over the next 3 years, we will be working to prepare long-term recommendations for how to include youth, draft a new youth resolution. This resolution also really recognised that youth focal points are big contributors to national wetland strategies and really encouraged their inclusion in delegations and national progresses. Also acknowledged the need for funding and logistical support. This is something that's also key, that it's not just words, but there's also infrastructure there and resources to support youth. And it also linked Ramsar youth efforts within the wider MEAs. And we were very happy to see at the UN Environmental Assembly in December how this youth resolution really influenced as well the newly adopted youth resolution, which is universally agreed upon by all the member states as well. One thing we also are very aware of is youth washing. Youth washing, by definition, is a superficial inclusion of youth. So when you include youth, but without any real decision-making power, resources, recognition, and this really undermines genuine intergeneral leadership and any lasting progress. So with that, we also have a strong message from Youth Engaged in Wetlands that we do urge parties to remain ambitious. By enforcing or instating formal mechanisms such as a youth working group, such as youth focal points. We want to see youth focal points empowered, that they really are meaningfully included in discussions, in strategies. And then this is also monitored and measured, and there's real targets for youth engagement. We also want to see that there's investment in the long-term development of young people, and particularly now especially with you, we work on a global level. So digital infrastructure is very important, similar to how we're connected today. And so that is something very practical where we need support. But yeah, again, that we need more than statements. We really want structures that last. Like we're here and we don't want to just be temporary guests, but we also want to be permanent members of the Convention on Wetlands family. And we're very happy to see how this has been supported through the Convention on Wetlands through the last years. But yeah, that's on the global policy level. But we also really bring this into our everyday work. So I just highlighted some of the real ways that we're also involved on the ground with across different generations, across different groups. My colleague Tandeka, she's from Eswatini. She was doing research on peatlands in Eswatini, and she was working also with local schools and local teachers to bring them into the research to see how they can contribute and also be part of it. Also, I'm involved with Repeat, which is a youth-led peatlands cooperative, which look at the intersection of art and grassroots activism for peatlands. And you can see here they traveled actually across Ireland, meeting with all different generations of the peatlands communities, even including the extractors and peat cutters, to understand what are the different needs and also to learn from them. There's a picture here from the Philippines where there was a National Mangrove Youth Summit where they really looked into how they could tap into the potential of youth for mangroves, as well as the Venice Agreement on peatlands and the Global Peatlands Initiative, which also look at Indigenous groups, artists, scientists, and how they can work together for peatlands. So our call to action, our final one, we have a call to action also for those working with youth. Maybe you're not in the youth category, but we would really love to see more youth-friendly spaces that include youth perspectives. We want to see people investing time and energy into intergenerational leadership, and particularly to see youth work not as free labor, but also legitimate work is a very important point. And then I guess the youth, our call to action is, well, become a national youth focal point. Why not? Join Youth Engaged in Wetlands, join your local wetlands organization, but also to be fearless, be rebellious, use the power of youth and this opportunity. Look to the possible and also don't stop asking the hard questions. That's where we can really play a role today. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much. And I'll pass on to the next speaker then. Thank you.
Thank you, Siska, for that insightful presentation. If anyone has questions for Siska, please write it down in the Q&A box and we'll get back to you in the second part of our webinar. Also, don't forget to follow the G20 Global Land Initiative on social media to stay updated on our latest news and activities. Joining us next is Eva Hernandez from Wetlands International. She's the program head of Wetlands International's peatland work. And Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Thaya. No youth washing, I'm not young anymore, but I was accepted here. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. I would like to focus the discussion now a little bit on peatlands, especially because, well, there is a clear link between peatlands and the climate. And that's what I would like to highlight. Maybe the title of my presentation sounds a bit pretentious, peatland action to save our climate. But yeah, we do believe in it. Peatlands can really make a difference because peatlands, although they occupy a very little piece of our planet's 3% of the land, they have a huge impact in terms of climate. When they are not well taken care of, they emit lots of carbon and they stop storing carbon. When they're healthy, they are just a magical carbon storage space. What you see here in this graph is how small peatlands are in terms of the land surface and how much carbon they can emit. And by intervening just in a piece of land the size of Madagascar, which is not that big, we can have an impact equivalent to that of aviation and shipping altogether. So that's the scale that we are referring to. And it's not only a key asset for holding carbon in this planet and keeping the climate safe, it's also a key asset for climate mitigation because they hold water, they hold soil, then they avoid erosion also by holding water. We can consider they are like catchment water engineers, but they're also a key hotspot of biodiversity, very special biodiversity growing on peatlands, as varied as tiny fish or beautiful orchids to large orangutans or anteaters. So it's very diverse. And finally, peatlands also help provide food, shelter, and especially they can be a source of livelihoods. We see a role for peatlands, and we see the need to work with them from the ground to a larger scale. Sorry, I don't know what happened. I missed a slide. Okay, it will come. Sorry. We want to get practical, working on peatlands, on wetlands in general. I included here the links to 3 projects on which we are working right now. They are all Horizon projects funded by the European Union, and they offer us the opportunity to bring together science with work on the ground with real stakeholders, not only theory, but move from the theory to the practice and see, okay, what tools are out there right now? How can they be used? And how can we innovate and invent new ones? Also, how can we attract funding into this type of work? Can the mapping be improved? And can we deliver new communication on capacity building materials? And we're also working with art as a key tool to make the link with the people on the other side. And I would like to focus a little bit on co-creation. Co-creation being a new term now, but it's like the evolution, the natural evolution of what used to be public participation when I was young. Understanding public participation in different levels. You can ask people for their opinion, and you can take it seriously, or just ask for their opinion and not make any use of it. That's one level of participation. But when we're talking about co-creation, it's much more. It's really working with the local communities, indigenous peoples, young people, but also older people, to understand what is in the landscape for them, how they understand it, what knowledge they have about it, but also bring local and foreign science when available, when necessary, to define not only what is the landscape right now, but where do we want to take it, knowing that restoring the landscape is not bringing it to what it was maybe 100 years ago. It's seeing, okay, on the current context and considering what's coming up, what can we aim at, no? And also considering what are the local people supporting. In this sense, we have developed in this Waterlands project a very nice co-creation framework document. It's not yet public, but it's coming right out of the oven very soon. If you follow the website, you will find it soon. With this work, what we wanted to do is to gather experiences from the ground, what was happening, and also try to identify, okay, how can we be creative? Because co-creation is not something that for which you can follow a recipe. It's really context-based. It's not the same to do co-creation in India or in Italy, completely different. Also, depending on the moment, it's not the same to do co-creation now and do it in 20 years from now, because people change and values change. And we wanted to provide this tool to show how have these co-creation tools been shared, been utilized, and some tips and tricks and experiences on how to go creative on adapting them to the local needs and context. Sorry, yeah, I did miss a slide. You're going to forgive me. It went somewhere in the cyberspace. I also wanted to talk about the work that we are doing on the ground, because it's not only theory and testing sites. We're also implementing on the ground restoration projects. We are right now, for example, working in Mongolia and in Peru, where there has been a huge change on how people are using land, when there has been this shift from nomad herders to stabilized herds, which are altering the use of soil. They're increasing the degradation of the soil and therefore erosion and carbon emissions, and also reducing the capacity to store carbon of these soils. We're working with the communities there to see, okay, what's happening? How can we do things differently? And we're working with them also to measure not only in terms of hectares restored, but how much carbon can we store back in the soil? What carbon storage capacity can we recover there? How much water can be stored in the soil? And what are the benefits in terms of biodiversity, water and carbon, but also livelihoods? How is this affecting the lives of the people living there? These are just two examples of the kind of work that can be developed on the ground. and the difference that co-creation and working together with local communities, really co-creating, not as Siska was saying, not handing over, but shaking hands, the difference that it can make. Another thing that we would like to do is to change the scale. Working locally is great, but we know since the 90s that we need to move from local to global. And this is what we are trying to do with the Peatland Breakthrough. The Peatland Breakthrough is a call to action. It links to the Marrakesh partnership that was developed in COP28. And there are different breakthroughs. The breakthroughs are initiatives to try to bring together different actors different than governments, because they already signed the Paris Agreement. But who else can we bring on board to reach those goals? That's what we are trying to do with the Peatland Breakthrough around peatlands. There are other breakthroughs for mangroves, for example, for coral reefs. This one is around peatlands. How can peatlands be the place to aggregate different interests and different parts of the society to conserve, rewet, and restore and enable the wise use of peatlands? There is a link with science. Based on science, we have defined these 3 core targets of the Peatland Breakthrough. We cannot afford to lose any more peatlands by 2030. We need to rewet and restore half of the peatlands that have been degraded by 2030 also. And we need to enable wise use by 2030, but implement wise use and have all our peatlands wet by 2050. This will allow us to reach global peatlands that are net zero and maybe even a net sink by 2050. So this will set up a right path to reach the targets of the Paris Agreement. And in order to do this, of course, we need to mobilize funds, and we need to apply science and deliver new knowledge, inventorying peatlands and monitoring what is taking place with them. But this cannot be done anyway. There are some guiding principles to be followed. Of course, safeguarding peatlands biodiversity, delivering the action based on science, advancing on equity and inclusion, of course, fostering shared responsibility and governance, mobilize funding that is transparent and integral, considering the landscape approach as a key element. And let me highlight this because working on a site level is good, it's right, it's necessary, but we need to understand landscape, especially when we are referring to wetlands, because water moves along the landscape. And finally, commit to sustainability and climate resilience. Anything that we do around the Peatland Breakthrough needs to contribute to these Paris Agreement targets and have a long-term vision and sustainability over time. We're not alone on this, and we hope to bring more voices on board. It is Siska is also in the team that's behind the Peatland Breakthrough. This is a small world, it seems. Here are the partners that are involved right now in the Peatland Breakthrough, and we would like to bring many others on board. As you can see, also Repeat is one partner. Right now, we are in the process of involving several champion countries like Uganda, Peru, and Germany have already confirmed they want to be champion countries. And we are discussing with different potential partners in the sectors of research, but especially business and finance, because they have the power to move many wheels and much funding to make this a reality and foster peatland restoration as a way to achieve our climate targets. And last but not least, let me share this picture that I love of a drosera, which is one of these little jewels of biodiversity, this insect-eating plant that grows in peatlands. And I do hope that if you didn't fall in love with peatlands now, you soon do with peatlands and with wetlands in general. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Eva, for your presentation. Our next speaker is Philip Agustam from Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. He is the Senior Scientific and Technical Officer. Please welcome Philip.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Sorry, I just joined a little bit late here. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Philip Agustam. My role in the convention is to manage the work of our scientific panel. So that's an advisory body to the convention, whereby all the guidance material that are produced for contracting parties are done by a panel of 18 experts. So we have it should be 6 regional experts, 6 scientists, and 6 practitioners. So they are nominated on a triennial basis. So that's quite recent. Just following after our COP last year, we had a new panel appointed. The same chair is still running it, Hugh Robertson from New Zealand, and a few new panel members were then appointed. We have a new work plan, which was just adopted actually 3 weeks ago. So the new work of the panel is upcoming. So for those that are interested, you can go online onto our website and find the STRP pages, and there is our newly adopted work plan where you can see sort of a bit more on the topics that we will be working on in the coming 3 years. With regards to youth involvement, that was already sort of mentioned in the first presentation. The STRP also has a focal point for youth. She was just actually took up that role a few days ago, Lynn Rochefort from Canada. So we were also hoping in the coming months and years to also have more youth involved in the work of the panel itself. Let's see here now. I had a few quick slides, and I have to apologize for my voice. I was rather sick last week, so I'm still suffering a little bit here. Let's see here. Let's see there. So, can everybody see that okay? Good. So I wanted just to bring into light two, and some of you might have already heard of these, but there's 2 main reports. One was produced for our COP last year, which focusing on wetland restoration or the scale of wetland restoration. It was our first attempt at trying to sort of collate available information on what's going on in that space. And also, and here you have the QR code for that specific report. The second one would be on our recent global wetland outlook, which also has a strong look at what's being restored and actually the costs needed to address the wetland loss and wetland degradation that's currently in there. And come to that QR code. Let's see, that should be here. So for those that would like to take a closer look at these reports, you have the QR codes here. Yeah, I will just do a very sort of brief introduction and sort of highlight a few sort of worrying elements as it relates to the need for wetland restoration. So for those that are not familiar with the Global Wetland Outlook, we published our 3rd iteration, a 2025 edition, also in relation to the COP that was last year. The aim of this Outlook study was to address the extent of wetland loss and degradation. We also wanted to assess the economic value of wetlands to society. And maybe more crucially, we wanted to see what would be the investments required to restore wetlands and sustainably manage those existing wetlands. So maybe without getting into too much details, some basic statistics. We took, sorry, slide. We took some basic statistics and found sort of we took a cutoff point to assess from 1970 how much wetlands have we actually lost. What we could assess, and this is only for 11 wetland types in the convention's classification system, there's 42. We only found reliable statistics for 11 of those, and we could assess that we've lost about 0.5% of wetlands annually since 1970. So that equates to about 22% loss globally of these 11 wetland types since 1970, which equates to about 411 million hectares that we've lost. That doesn't mean that the land had been lost. Usually it's been converted into other type of use function, commonly agricultural land, but it's so we don't distinguish in that sense, but it's been converted or lost from wetlands. And what we did from this was take, like, if we've lost these 411 million hectares, what is then our obligation in terms of restoration? From that, we took then the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which sets out that we should restore at least 30% of those remaining wetlands. So basically, we've used that as sort of the targets report trying to assess how much do we need to restore and how much would that cost us. So that would imply that we should restore 130 million hectares. So that relates to the target 2 of the Kunming, the GBF, basically. And again, this is only for the 11 out of those 42 types of wetlands that we looked at. If you look at degraded wetlands, if that should also be factored in, we're looking at about restoring restoring 350 million hectares. In total, we're looking at conserving roughly 428 million hectares. And again, just reiterating, this is just for 11 wetland types. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is just to contrast this a little bit. So if you then go into globally what we see in terms of the type of ambitions in terms of targets and goals that are being set. So if we look at taking the GBF targets and we're saying, well, we have to restore this to reach the targets of the GBF. What is being pledged and promised on a more practical level, on a global level? And here's a few examples. We already had nice examples from the Global Peatland Initiative. And there's a range of other initiatives going on, and ambitions are quite high. You can see here they kind of line up with those losses that we see in real terms. Again, I don't know why this is moving on by itself. So roughly we have targets to restore 400,000 hectares of mangroves. We have targets to restore 300,000 kilometers of rivers. We have also, again, when we're talking about degraded land, we have targets to restore 450 million hectares, as well as 350 million hectares wetlands itself. So all these sort of targets that are, or work that is ongoing, sort of align with those targets that have been set by the GBF. Now, the reason why I raise this as an issue is because when you actually look then at what's actually happening on the ground, that is where we see sort of a huge gap. Now, this comes from our own national reports, which was also reported at the COP, where we see that while we have very high targets and ambitions, less than 10% of our contracting parties have actually restored any wetlands since 2018. And out of those, if you look at the restoration barometer, which is run by the FAO, only about 28% of the pledged areas are currently under active restoration. So there's an enormous gap between what we have set up as basic targets and what's actually happening on the ground. And it is a bit sobering. So it's just to sort of pull these two types of information flows together, and you see like, well, yes, we need to restore this, but it's not actually what we're seeing on the ground. So basically, this brings us to what we try to highlight in the recent Global Wetland Outlook, which is basically what we sort of pose as a financing challenge. The global conservation and restoration targets are in the order of about 500 million hectares. So there's an urgent need to scale up the funding. For those that are familiar with the IPBES assessment on transformative change, they basically assess that currently we're using 0.25% of the global GDP, and that might very well be less at this point, as an investment into biodiversity restoration or conservation. So that's sort of what we're spending currently. Now, what we assessed, and this is again, I'm reiterating these 11 ecosystem types, the costs that are needed just to restore the lost and degraded land for these 11 wetland types is 1.2% of global GDP. So it's again, just emphasizing this enormous gap in available funding, and the need for additional finances to restore wetlands as this currently stands. So basically, the main message here is that we need sort of a major shift in the financial flows to be able to reach the goals of the convention, to meet the goals of the GBF, the Sustainable Development Goals. At the present, the gap is enormous and somewhat out of reach. The financial estimates that we sort of assess it, and I guess this should all be taken with a bit of grain of salt. The GWO, or the Global Wetland Outlook, estimated that we have about 1,425 million hectares of wetlands at present, and they generate roughly 7 point or close to 8 trillion. So that's the median, and the mean annual value of these wetlands is about close to $40 trillion US. So the financial impact of losing further wetlands is also quite substantial. And the costs of maintaining and managing these wetlands up to 2025 is in the order of close to $200 trillion US. So it's just sort of trying to give a bit of a sobering viewpoint in where we're standing in terms of wetland restoration and where we really need to go to address sort of this financial situation we're facing in terms of wetland restoration. And I think that was my final slide, just to keep it a little bit like that. And I'm happy to take any questions if you have them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone has questions for our speakers, please write it down in the Q&A box and we'll get back to you in the second part of our webinar. Our next and final speaker, Mini Degawan, she is the Managing Director of the Forest Stewardship Council Indigenous Foundation. Mini, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Apparently, I cannot put on my camera. Apologies for that. Apologies for all the changes, and I'm in a noisy airport. But I just wanted to quickly introduce myself. I'm Mini Degawan, a Kankanari Igorot from the Cordillera, Philippines. And you might be wondering, what is a Cordillera Igorot doing talking about wetlands? Well, the Cordillera is known, aside from its mountains, it's also known for its rice terraces, which our forefathers have carved out from the mountains. And it's really an engineering feat to manage the water from the forest going down to the terraces and making sure that everybody gets an equal share of what they need. So as an Indigenous person, I grew up hearing over and over again the basic commands of the community, which is one, never take more than what you need, share. Whatever you do to the earth, you do to yourself. We are not separate from the land, our language, our cultures, our food. And everything comes from the land and we return to the land. And perhaps that's differing factor between indigenous peoples and non-indigenous peoples is this relationship with the land and waters, because of course indigenous peoples are not just water dependent, but some of them are also water dependent. And in the work that I have been doing, while most of the time I have been working on forests, I have also seen indigenous peoples' efforts to recover lost territories. Indigenous peoples have been stewarding lands and have managed to master the art of restoration because they had to live with typhoons, earthquakes that have really destroyed the landscape, but they managed to come back. The problem now is that with industrialization, mining, agricultural plantations, dams, and all of this, it is really becoming an issue how indigenous peoples can restore their lands. In the Philippines, where I come from, a ritual by high government officials where they hold tree seedlings and in the presence of media take pictures that they are planting. There has been, I think, every year a restoration program built around restoring some of the forest lands, but they have all failed. And why is this? And I was just listening to the previous speaker talking about financial issues, but really the bigger factor on why restoration is not succeeding is because the participation of the people who know the territories best are not ensured. Most of the restoration plans happen in the capitals or even where I am now. I just came from Rome for the SBI meetings of the CBD, and decisions happen there where the people on the ground who know the territories and what grows best, what is needed, and so on and so forth are not part of the equation. For instance, in the Philippines, after all the pictures have been taken, the government officials leave. And so who takes care of those seedlings that have been planted? If the communities were not involved, they don't have any ownership to that. And so it is a waste of resources. So I think first and foremost, before even talking, I recognize that the financial issue is a big issue, but really the more important part is listening to the people on the ground, those who have lived on these lands, those who know what is best, include them in the planning. Stop these top-down planning methods because you are not integrating the traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples, which has been developed through years of interaction with the land. So that's one. And second, I heard somebody talk about the integrated landscapes because that is also part of the problem now is that we have um, fractured. We have this false divide. So we talk of climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation separate from each other as if they were separate, they were events happening at different times in different territories. The truth of the matter is they are all happening at the same time in the same territories. And yet again, the people who are experiencing it the most are not included. So when you talk about fragmentation of the environmental discussion, even the solutions become fragmented. And worse, the financing gets fragmented. So now you have a rivalry between climate change and biodiversity on who gets the most funding. So I think we have to rethink how we look at all these issues and look at it from the perspective of indigenous peoples that, these are all happening in our territories at the same time. And let us stop this dividing them unnecessarily. And I think this has also been the one of the things that I have noticed of doing this work for several years is that the youth definitely has to be involved because, for instance, in the rice terraces, most of our terraces are now being uh, left behind. And so because they are not being tended to, they erode. And why is this? Because the youth are leaving the communities to the cities. And when they do that, the traditional knowledge of fixing the terraces, of tracing where the water comes from and how it is going to be divided is lost. And so we cannot look at restoration separate from the questions of cultural erosion, the questions of poverty for communities. So I think um, more and more we really should push for more synergies of the different conventions and that we can all work together to solve the common problem of environmental destruction. So thank you so much. And yes, I'll be here for questions.
Thank you, Minnie. So let's conclude our first part of our webinar here and start our second part, which will be the Q&A session hosted by Jamian. If anybody has question for our speakers, please write it down in the Q&A box. And now I'm handing it to my co-host, Jamian.
Thank you so much, Jaya. So we're gonna have a lot of questions from the participants watching from worldwide. So the first question from a participant from Liberia, Ebenezer, is that what is maybe a best solution or ideal solution for wetland protection and restoration? So can we learn from a specific single practice? And please introduce a specific practice in detail. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes. Do you want us just to jump in, or how would you like to structure this?
So maybe you can share us about like a specific practice, so the process of how like a wetland restoration project is developed, and the learning
Um,
from the practice.
I would, and maybe put another emphasis. I think maybe they were from the peatlands initiative. We can have some nice examples of how wet peatlands are being restored practically. Maybe what I would just like to highlight in the restoration space is the fact that we are still losing wetlands at a rather enormous speed. Um, and it's substantially cheaper to protect what we have. Restoring wetlands is incredibly expensive, and often it's not always possible. Like you take the case of the peatlands, even if you re-wet a peatland, it's not certain that all those natural processes will kick off, the ones that were there, nor that it will immediately become a carbon sink, let's say, to begin with. And that's a process that has evolved over a very, very long period of time, and it's incredibly difficult to return the environment to what it used to be. So what I would like to maybe just emphasize is the fact that what we really need to do is make sure we protect what's there, because the cost of actually restoring wetland is astronomically higher compared to that. So maybe I leave it to others to say something else.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sorry, if I may, I fully agree. I mean, I don't think there's a single recipe for wetlands, but protecting them, conserving them, avoiding their destruction is the first one. And I would say that the next key measure would be to look, I mean, a wetland is a wetland because it has water. So hydrology, how water is behaving, how it is reaching the wetland, is it reaching the wetland in the right time, in the right quantity, with the right quality? I think that is a key element. It's not so much, it may be sometimes about reprofiling the wetland or even planting some vegetation, but the water component is, I think, the key one once the wetland has been altered after not conserving it.
Thank you, Eva. And I noticed that there are a lot of questions about the financing, especially how those developing countries can access grants worldwide. So, could you please share more about the financing projects to help those developing economics to protect and restore their wetlands?
It's a bit of a challenging question in the sense that I think these instruments that are out there, for instance, on the European level, there are a number of financing instruments, for instance, through the common agricultural policy or other types of industry that sectors that finances restoration initiatives. Let's say in Europe, you have targets to restore quite a lot of peatlands these days across Europe, like these big initiatives in Germany. They access commonly funds on the national level. On a global scale, it really is sort of a fragmented picture. In some cases, you can access the funding through the GEF or other types of initiative, but it's sort of what the work I showed before is that this not enough funding available at present. Also, the costs vary significantly depending on what you do. That's why we struggle with trying having adequate numbers associated to the different wetland types, is that the variance is also very high in terms of the costs depending on what you do and where you do it. So it depends on the different types of wetlands you're trying to restore and what you're trying to do. So it can be from something very basic and simple and low cost to costing billions of dollars. You look at the Everglades in the US, there's a multi-billion-dollar project just to restore one sort of watershed.
Sorry, are you still on, Philip?
Yes, sorry, no, I was finished. Sorry, so I was leaving it there. Sorry, yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Philip. And as mentioned by Philip, the wetland protection and restoration facing a lag in findings, just like any other kind of land protection initiatives. So maybe there's a necessary step for emphasis on global collaboration to help more developing countries to access more grants for wetland protections. And we've got a last question for our speakers. So there are many participants keen in working in wetland protection and restoration. So could you please kindly give them some suggestions? So what they should do and how can they prepare to work in wetland protection and restoration?
Thank you, Damian. Yeah, I can come in here from our experience with youth engaged in wetlands. So some quite practical ways to get involved is that, well, we highly encourage everyone to get involved with youth engaged in wetlands. I've posted the link into one of the questions. I hope you can find it. And to take that even one step further, as part of the youth resolution, it has been stated that all contracting parties, so all countries, can have a national youth focal point. So I really highly recommend to check if your country has a youth focal point. And if not, you can nominate yourself or empower a youth in your community to be part of it. I will also share a video on exactly how this process works. Also looking beyond that in terms of opportunities. Yeah, one thing, and it also links a bit with the financial side. This is one of the biggest barriers to getting involved in wetlands restoration, particularly from developing countries. We see a lot of free internships, free opportunities for exposure, especially when it takes into some of the more skills that youth have with innovation or with communications. So we actually have a youth platform as well, the Ramsar Community Youth Platform, which I will also share the link to, where we also post a lot of opportunities for you to get involved. So I will share that in the questions as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Siska. Would you like to add something on that, Eva? Yeah, please.
Yeah, please. Well, sorry, also on the previous question later, if you allow me to jump back. But regarding youth, I think I would like to give a little bit of more abstract message. And it is to, okay, work in wetlands. Yeah, we need you. Please come on board and never lose hope. It may come a certain point when it seems like, oh, this is for nothing, we're achieving nothing. When you look back, always there has been an evolution. You see how things evolve and change, maybe not as fast as we wished. Maybe destruction advances more than conservation does, or changing in mindsets. But I think keeping hope and knowing that you're not alone, I think that's a key message. And regarding finance, and it links somehow to this, it's about innovation. I mean, most of the funding going into wetlands right now, it's public money. And we need new people to come up with new ideas. So there was an estimation from the European Investment Bank a couple of years ago that 70% of the nature-based solutions, that is restoring nature to pay services to society, like climate adaptation or mitigation. So 70% of those funds came from public funds, 30% only from private funds. We need to change this because there is much more private money than public money out there. There's trillions being invested in things that are not wetlands, that may even be going against wetlands or nature in general. So innovating, identifying new ways in which we can attract this private money into wetlands is key. And carbon is probably the low-hanging fruit. Carbon credits, when done properly, can be a source of income and can allow to bring money into wetlands, not only restoration, but also conservation.
Yes, thank you, Eva. So yeah, I agree with you that we should discover maybe a change or new patterns in terms of how like private sectors and the public sector collaborate on financing those wetland protection projects. So Thank you so much, all of our participants, and we are quite impressed by you. Oh, sorry. Let you. Yeah, go ahead,
No,
please.
no, it's just to sort of emphasize a little bit what Siska said. We are very happy to see youth involved in the work of the convention. They have been very active in the COP. I was very happy to see that myself. Also, just to encourage that those that have an interest in the scientific work of the convention, there'll be also opportunities for youth to be increasingly involved in that work. So please get in touch with us through the SGRP pages if you so wish. And we will be posting more information there about future opportunities as well to be involved a bit more in sort of the more scientific work that relates to wetlands.
Okay, thank you, Philip. So we are impressed about your dedications and a lot of questions coming from the question box until now. However, we may reach the end of this webinar. So first, I would like to thank all the staff support this webinars. So first, Wagaki and Omer, thank you for your support in terms of the administration and technical support. And second, I would like to deeply appreciate for the participation of our speakers. Thank you so much for your sharing in terms of knowledge, practice, and the overall picture of the land restoration and protections. And I think we all are inspired by your presentations and maybe be ready to participate in the land protection in the future. And at last, I would like to thank our host today, Zaya Khan Jaga Saikhan from Mongolia. Thank you for your continuous dedication in this monthly land generation restoration dialogue in the past few months. And we wish you all the best in the future as you are gonna end this role in the end of February. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zaya, and the rest of the team, as well as our speakers. Thank you for your participation in this dialogue. And we have another generation restoration dialogue next month, which is about the forest. So please stay with us and join us next month in March. So thank you so much. This is the end of this webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice
Thank
day.
you.
You too. Thank you so
everyone.
much.